with this and some other factors as well. And so on the basis of that, we have the future LV recommendations for agricultural preservation, with the dark green areas being high priority and the lighter green areas just down here, it's almost a yellowish on this map, being recommended for medium preservation priority of the agricultural lands. So again, you can go in and use this online application and appreciate all the information, turn the layers on and off so you can see the kind of data you want to see at a given moment. And I think at that point, we will turn it over to Becky to talk about historic preservation resources as soon as I stop sharing.
Give me time to share too here, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
Absolutely.
So just going to talk a little bit about historic resources and some of the information that's available vis-a-vis the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission. Okay, so I actually want to start with the Lehigh County Livable Landscapes Plan first, which is available through our website, but it's the County Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. And what we did when we were putting this together for Lehigh County is we took a look at when different structures were built. Now, if you can see my mouse here, you can see South Whitehall there, and you can see those commercial structures are in green or in blue, and green dots are residential structures. So zoomed in there a little bit, and you can see which structures were built between 1926 and 1945. In the plan, whoops, there's a series of maps. This is 1946 to 1967, and you can see quite a bit of development activity was happening, commercial and residential, in the township. And then there's some earlier maps as well. So the technical definition under federal law for historic is 50 years of age or older. So really, that's in a lot of people's lifetimes, right? So at the end of the day, you really want to take things that were basically built from the 1960s backwards as potentially historic. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to want to preserve those things or that those are nationally important per se, though some of them will be. But neighborhoods themselves can have a period of significance that's important as well. I just wanted to show you some earlier maps really quick. I should have started there. We have some stuff between 1901 and 1925. And we specifically cut these eras to basically address periods of very specific political and economic circumstances within the US, because that actually then drives the economy quite a bit and what gets built. And this is our last map. And I guess I kind of reserve the best for last, the really old stuff. So these are things built roughly after the Civil War, 1861 to 1900. And you can see that there was a fair amount of rural scale development and crossroad village development in South Whitehall at that time. So now I'm going to switch over to our transportation plan, also available at lvpc.org, a series of interactive maps, just like Teresa and Jeff had showed you. And the really cool thing about the transportation plan is the fact that we organized everything based on then those eras of development using actual property records and building dates. So we have a series of what we call historic centers. So these are communities that were largely designed and developed by people before the car. They tend to be more walkable. They tend to have narrower lane widths, so cars tend to drive a little bit more slowly through them. Then you have, your next era, which is really those post-war centers where the car became the dominant form of development, and we built everything around the car. MacArthur Road in your neighboring Whitehall is a perfect example of that. Very little pedestrian or bike accommodations. And now we have the current era that we're really in, which is kind of an emerging period where you're getting a lot more walkability, bikeability, and transportation. So we're really kind of building a culture of transportation equity. And you can really see that in some of the newer development in South Whitehall. So I'm zoomed into this northeast corner of South Whitehall Township on purpose. And why I zoomed in there is because they're at Mock Chunk Road, and oh, Mechanicsville Road is Mechanicsville, right there around Grumpy's Barbecue. So you can kind of line that transportation planning up with then those era maps from the livable landscape plans and really see where you kind of have those historic cores. That's one of them. You've got Myersville. You've got a lot in the north end of the township for sure. You start going over into Orfield, Ace Hardware's right there off of 309. This whole kind of area, even into North Whitehall, is really the village of Orfield. Gooseville has some incredibly beautiful and intact historic resources right there in the middle of the village, and you get the idea. So and you can really kind of see, actually Gooseville is one of the best examples in the township. I'll zoom way in so you can see the building footprints there. And you see how closely those buildings are spaced together. Well, that's a walking distance. So usually in just looking at aerials, you can, even without having the information of when something was built, you can really start to piece together where you had those pre-car era locations. And then you have to plan for your land use and your development and prioritization of those around those existing development patterns. So I'll just end really quickly here because I know I'm up against the clock. We have a lot of cool things to talk about. Is your pre-World War II, your historic centers, and even I would argue some of your early post-war neighborhoods, like down over here in Greenewalt, have some measure of historic character and identity. Really differentiates that place from any other place. I'm getting close here. I'll find Greenewalds. There we go. Right off of Route 22. So they really have kind of a development intensity and character that you don't find in other places. So from that sense, it has an identity within the global identity of South Whitehall Township. So figuring out how you balance those things in your comprehensive plan and prioritize those things is going to be very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our Lehigh Valley Planning Commission subject matter experts for walking us through the Natural Resource Plan, the Farmland Preservation Plan, and discussing historic and cultural areas of significance. And so what we want to do now is, well, first off, I know we were joined by a couple more working group members, so I want to give them the chance to introduce themselves. Ms. Sheridan, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. Michelle Sheridan. I was at the last meeting and had a 5 o'clock appointment, so I'm just coming to tonight's meeting now. So
thank you so much for being here. And Mr. Wolk, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm here as a citizen at this meeting. I'm a South Whitehall Township Commissioner. I'm assigned to the South Whitehall Land Preservation Committee.
Thank you both, and thanks to all of our working group members. So before we go into our discussion and getting towards identifying some of those recommendations with the help of the LVPC folks, we wanted to open it up for a general Q&A based on what they presented or pointed questions you may have about best practices or any type of information you'd like to know further based on their presentation or otherwise before we dive into our discussion. So we have about 10 minutes for just a general Q&A, and then we'll go into the discussion Jamboard portion, which you guys have not experienced yet because, well, some of you have, but those we met in person last week. So we did the real live Jamboard. Anyway, please, if you'd like to ask a question, you can put your name in the chat, or we're a small group. Just feel free to signal you want to speak and go on ahead. So what questions do we have for our Lehigh Valley Planning Commission subject matter experts?
I'll start if, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, please.
I was going to ask about incentives the township could consider for reuse of historic buildings and barns. There are some current incentives in the zoning ordinance. Anybody can provide information about additional ways the township can promote new uses and reuse and renovation of older buildings would be appreciated.
That's an excellent question, Charlie. There are a couple of incentives depending on the level of historic preservation you want to do. But the absolute most lowest hanging fruit, and too few people take advantage of this, is if you have a commercial or a mixed use structure. You can automatically take a 10% tax credit after you file some actually very minor paperwork, which is really, and it's a federal historic tax credits that, you know, basically you just have to document the date that it was built. That's readily available from the county, file some paperwork, and then as long as you're attempting to maintain the historic integrity of it, you get to take the 10% off the top. A lot of people will sell those credits for cash to help with actual renovation. Again, it has to be a commercial or a mixed use property. And if it is nationally significant and someone would want to go through the process of getting it listed on a National Register of Historic Places, which quite frankly, an individual property is very hard to do. A group of properties, let's say like Dorneyville, for example, as a post-World War II development, or Gooseville as a historic district, a lot easier. And then all of those property owners could take the benefit of 20% to maintain their property and or do substantial rehabilitation. Those are major federal incentives, and actually Pennsylvania has some backing for residential, but that's a little bit more complicated. Like the 20%, the listing on the National Register is more complicated. So those are some direct historic preservation incentives. There's so much misinformation about historic preservation out there. You could get a property or group of properties listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it's nothing more than a gold star in the sense that your group of properties or property is nationally significant. So significant to the history of the United States of America. No one can tell you what to do with your property. You can tear it down. You can set it on fire. You can paint it green with purple polka dots if you want. And there's a lot of misinformation in that regard. So again, it's America, property rights are everything. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of leeway with historic preservation. And since your older buildings tend to be character defining in and of themselves, really looking at uses, especially when you're talking about your agricultural properties, which in a lot of ways can be easier, is important. We see a strong growth in the wedding barn market, which is more than weddings, but those event barn type facilities around the Lehigh Valley. A lot of conversions to things like breweries, restaurants, wineries. That sort of value add to actual agricultural operations is really sort of all the rage all around the country, but definitely we've seen a strong growth of that as well. And so, you know, the township can easily make some zoning ordinance amendments to expand some of those uses once they identify the locations for those to be appropriate to go into. Event facilities like wedding barns require a lot of thought and traffic management and other things. And so you have to, it's probably inappropriate for all the ag properties in South Whitehall, but in certain locations where you have decent infrastructure, water, sewer, and other things that are needed to support those facilities, which South Whitehall does have better access to that stuff than some of the neighboring communities, some of that makes a whole lot of sense.
Good, that's helpful. I would just add that South Whitehall has one of the two oldest buildings in the county, right along the Jordan Creek, and there's also a landmark barn right next to it.
Thank you, Charlie. Mr. Wolf, did you want to go next?
Sure. First, I want to thank Becky, Teresa, and Jeff for attending as subject matter experts. I have a very close relationship with Rick Mulchaney, and it's the first time I'm even at a virtual meeting with any of you, and he's spoken very highly of you. So glad to meet you. I have a real easy question. I joined 10 minutes late, and you were demonstrating looks like an online app. or resource. So if I go to LVPC website, will it be easy to find it? Only a short answer. Don't take a lot of time on this. But if I go there, will it be easy for me to find the app you were looking through?
Should be, yes. Hannah dropped all the links in the chat as well. And if you
Okay.
just search for Future LV, the regional plan, and when a static map comes up, there'll be text that says interactive map. Click on that text and it'll take you right there. And we showed 3 different ones, natural resources, farmland preservation, and then the transportation map. The other resource we showed was actually the county's livable landscapes plan, which had those historic building development dates as well.
All right. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Wilk, I did just drop the farmland preservation plan map in the chat. So it's the last thing. If you scroll all the way down, it will take you there.
Yes. Yes, I see it. Thank you.
Great. Are there other questions, general questions or follow-ups for our LVPC subject matter experts? From working group members or from the township? Oh, we have a question that popped up in the chat. At the corner of 309 and Huckleberry, there is an old barn for sale and a house, etc., that will be auctioned on Saturday. This seems question mark. So that's I'm Marsha, I'm doing that for free. And if you want to unmute yourself and expand on that, please feel free.
Yeah, I drove by that today. I mean, I've driven by it several times, and the barn is really pretty, you know, sort of up on the corner there, up a little bit on the ridge. And then I noticed that there's like a house or some kind of a thing, house, several buildings that are going to be auctioned on Saturday. And that seems, if you're talking about historic preservation and in Guffsville particularly, is that something that we need to pay attention to now?
Really can't do anything this fast, right? Unless you want to just buy it at the auction on Saturday, right?
Yeah.
So,
What I'm talking about.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
You know the property that I'm talking about?
Yeah, I just looked it up on Google Maps, and I'm pretty sure there's a couple of barns there, but I'm pretty sure I know where you're talking about. It's right at the corner.
Right, and then just before the corner, coming down 309, there are several houses. I haven't been able to stop to see, but there's several houses and buildings, some of which are going to be auctioned. Not the barn. The barn's still for sale, but there's an auction taking place for this like little compound. And if
That's a beautiful. It's got a stone side on it.
Yeah, I think so.
The barn. Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, that location in particular is probably being auctioned off because it's really valuable for commercial development in that location right now, would be my assumption. Again, assumptions are dangerous because you don't know for sure. But if there's a sign on the property, you could certainly call up and I mean, the township would know what it's zoned, but if it's zoned commercial at all, anything in the Lehigh Valley, especially if it has industrial potential, is just being gobbled up left and right. And I don't shoot the messenger for saying that. I'm saying that from a neutral position because I get the chance to see all the land development proposals in the Lehigh Valley. And it is absolutely unbelievable how quickly properties are selling for commercial development right now.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of driving down going, oh, is this another place for another Wawa or something?
Huckleberry and where? What intersection?
It's Huckleberry 309.
Huckleberry and 309.
You're talking southwest corner?
Southwest corner, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that is zone neighborhood commercial. That's not going to be a Wawa, that's for sure. So that neighborhood commercial is our lightest form of commercial. So it may be, they may have intents for commercial, but you never know.
Okay, yeah, I just pointed out that that's a place that I actually have seen today. and was curious about how, in making plans for resource protection, you deal with places like that. Right now, it's beautiful, but
Yeah, neighborhood commercial may actually help to rehab the buildings. Because it gives them a range of
Maybe.
uses without giving them the types of uses that are more likely to cause demolition.
okay.
The critical question is it zoned, is there any industrial potential there? Because that's in the private sector, not Lehigh Valley Plantation. I want to make that abundantly clear. But we listen to the private sector when they tell us their radius from an interchange that they want, and this falls within that zone. So, you know, I think I'm always looking at where we could have growth that doesn't make sense. We're always looking for those sorts of things.
Okay.
Doesn't look like there's any industrial next door to it right now.
No.
Yeah, that doesn't, I mean, these folks are shameless. It doesn't, sorry, I'll be quiet now. I worry every day about these things.
On the theme of incentives, one of the things some communities have done is they've given people an extra dwelling unit if they preserve an historic house or a barn. Because what happens is, let's say you've got a piece of property and you're allowed 6 houses. It's got a small existing farmhouse on it and a barn. They can build a $600,000 house there, or they can rehab the old house. Well, they're typically going to demolish the old house and build a $600,000 house instead. So if you give them an extra unit, if they preserve the house or turn the barn into a house, sometimes that makes the economics work where they're much more likely to preserve that building. Because they're not losing a unit, they're gaining a unit.
Okay.
Or if you allow, beyond just the normal home-based business, if you allow a business along with the house, like out of the barn, that's another great way to do that too. And I'm glad you brought that up, Charlie, about the additional dwelling unit.
Yeah, a lot of communities call it a farm-based business. It's an accessory business with limitations. But a lot of these barns are not being used for agriculture anymore. And they're really
Right.
hard to maintain.
Right. They're not insulated. Yeah, there's a lot of issues with them usually.
Well, I think unless there's a pressing question from anyone in the working group or from the township, we're going to shift over to our discussion, which will, again, on our Jam board, which some of you have experienced and I think some of you have not. So I am about to I just put into the chat, a link will take you, and I'm going to share my screen. It's basically an online platform to allow us to have the type of, collaborative discussion that we, would have if we were in person, like we did last week with the resource protection, with putting up Post-its and thinking through and responding to questions. So as you're making your way to the Jamboard, and you just need to click the link that's in the chat, if you're looking at my screen, you will see that over in the left-hand corner, there's our icon, and the fourth one down, so 1, 2, 3, 4, is sticky note. And that's how we're asking folks to share their thoughts and respond to the questions here. So all you have to do is write your thought on the sticky note, press save, and it goes up on the board. And you can do as many as you would like. You can change the color. So we're going to use this as a place to capture our thoughts, capture where we are at. And if you don't feel like being on the Jamboard and you want to drop your thoughts into the chat, we can record that for you. Or please feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute yourself and give your thoughts, and we'll capture them as you're speaking. So the first discussion question we have to kind of move us forward in evaluating recommendations is, what is working well when it comes to resource protection in South Whitehall Township today? Where have we seen some successes, some on the right track? And can you give examples of policies or even places that reflect good practices in resource protection? So we'll give folks a couple, just start populating the Jamboard. And again, if you don't feel like using the sticky note, you can just drop your thoughts into the chat or unmute yourself and we'll capture it there. So we have our first contribution, restoration of riparian buffers. Jordan Creek Greenway Parks. All right, we have some from the chat. So you're just gonna see me adding. We have save that one. And then trailways. So capturing that from the chat. And don't worry if, and then we have the extension. This is from the chat. All right, so we have formation of the Land Preservation Committee, strong focus and has been successful on parks creation and trailways, Cover Bridge Park, protection of Kohler Ridge, existing parks and new park, and the Jordan Creek Trail to the high school. So if other thoughts that you might have on this, on what's working well, I think we're seeing, and please, everyone who, or if you've put in a thought and you want to expand upon it, please feel free to do so. I know sometimes it's easy to immediately go to some of the problem areas, but it's also really helpful to think about where we are doing well or where the township is seeing success. So maybe those successes can be built upon. So any other thoughts or pieces here? And I want to highlight, we heard working on the comprehensive plan now. So really starting to plan and, you know, making this a implementable, actionable plan for the next 10 years. Any other thoughts, or would anyone like to add anything? And township staff who we have on the line, and of course our LVPC SMEs, do you have any thoughts about these pieces or observations you've made about what's working well in South Whitehall? And if you do, feel free to just unmute yourself and let us know.
I think the Jordan Creek Greenway is one of the coolest. It does a couple of things, from parks, rec, open space. We talked yesterday in transportation group about how it actually even could serve as a commuter trail. And, you know, it has all these environmental benefits, from floodplain preservation to, Charlie had even mentioned, you know, some of the historic resources in that area, but it's regionally significant. And South Whitehall Township has taken a leadership position on the development of the Jordan Creek Greenway over all other communities in partnership with the county for years. And I just think the township should be commended for making that not just a jewel for the township, but for the whole region.
Thank you so much for that. And that was actually a good point and a very important point that was made as we discussed transportation last night. And I think as we think about how these different groups intersect and build on one another, that is a key piece of infrastructure and a resource that will, I think, tie together a lot of recommendations. Anything else about what's working well now that folks want to share before we advance to the next question? There are no other thoughts. I'm going to move us to the next space. So where are the problem areas? Where are the pain points in resource protection? We began to discuss both good things and challenges in our last meeting when we were talking about existing conditions. We talked about, you know, as development happens, or the concept that there's more traffic coming and what that can mean, and what, you know, how resources are utilized as growth happens. And I think, you know, there's a lot of pieces here. When we think about the problem areas, we can start to then think about the solutions and opportunities for recommendation. So a funding source for preservation needs to be established. That was definitely discussed last week, and I think is important to advance here. From Charlie from the chat. Incentives for protection. I'm just going to add Charlie's from the chat. Anyone else wants to drop their thoughts into the chat or unmute themselves, we can capture it that way. Not having a budget or collecting funds for land preservation. So we're seeing a lot of funding and incentives here. Hard to reuse many old buildings, especially barns. We have the comment from Mr. Wolk in the chat, which I'll add now. And so having officially agricultural preserved land, and Mr. Wall commenting on the Land Preservation Committee will be a tool in that. So again, something to carry forward. Any challenges? I know obviously resource protection is such a big topic, and you saw that hearing the 3 presentations. We have natural resources, floodplains, woodlands, riparian buffers, steep slope, farmland preservation, and as well as historic and cultural places of significance. So how this all comes together under resource protection, and a lot of those challenges can be related. So we have a comment, need to prioritize the different types of places in the township so preservation priorities can be made. It's like a really good point about identification and prioritization, plan for farmland preservation, more funding. Other thoughts or any observations we have from the working group members or staff or our SMEs on, are these problems that maybe from the LVPC perspective, we're seeing as challenges across the region when it comes to resource protection, or what are some of the issues popping up in other communities?
Jeff, this is all you.
Yeah, I was just unmuting. And obviously, funding is a critical part of this whole process, as it is for almost anything anybody needs to do or wants to do. And there's a lot of different funding opportunities available. And the key thing is just to get organized in terms of the specific interests that a community has. And I would double up on the comment that Becky made also about, just the Jordan Creek Greenway, and through the Lehigh Valley Greenways process, that Greenway has been a priority throughout the whole Lehigh Valley, and South Whitehall Township in particular has been very active within that group, and so is very aware of the variety of funding sources that are available. And there's also things that the municipality can do to further establish what some funding that could be available to add to the mix. That can involve, looking at an open space plan and then turning that into, if the residents are interested, possibly creating a fund at the township level to help support the interest in preservation.
Hey, Jeff, it's Randy. I'll just jump in here real quick. We do have in the budget this year for an update to our Parks, Recreation, Trail, and Open Space Plan. So that's something we are actively working on. We certainly see that there's an opportunity there for an update, with all the changes to the facilities, new parks, new programs and events. It's time we take a really serious and in-depth look at that, to plan for the next 10 years here.
Right. That's terrific.
Yeah, that I know, Randy, you touched on that in our first meeting, and again, carrying some of these things forward. So it's very exciting. And I think you had mentioned that the comp plan can help provide some of the groundwork, maybe for the direction of that plan update. Is that still correct, or is that what?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. We're really anxious to see what comes out of this working group, and what makes it into the official comp plan. It's going to save us some work and, of course, money on the back end. That way we're not duplicating, tasks and spending the money twice. So, yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of this comp plan, and, using the Parks, Recreation, Trail, and Open Space Plan to mirror and support, what the comp plan is recommending.
Just taking that one step further, in terms of the township defining what the interests are in terms of preservation moving forward, there is a wonderful tool under the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code called an official map that allows communities to identify their interests in future types of resources, whether that be agricultural, land preservation, or the creation of parks, or conservation easements to preserve woodlands or anything like that. That can be and it can be used for other things too, like roads and a variety of things. And so that's an opportunity for the community. I know there is one for South Whitehall dating to about 2010. So it could be an opportunity to refresh that that map and that tool to help further those preservation efforts moving forward as well.
Thank you so much for that, Jeff. And yes, I think we spent some time looking at the official map, and we definitely can bring that up as we move forward in this discussion, because it is such an important tool. And the previous official map was created out of the 2009 comp plan, so there's an opportunity to make those updates in line with the recommendations. So if there's anything anyone else wants to add here, please drop it in the chat or add it in on a sticky note or speak up. But I think we're really moving ourselves to the next question, which is what types of tools identified in this with discussion with Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, what best practices are relevant to addressing these problems? And things have already been popping up, I know. So I might try to capture some of them, but what's really coming to the top of your mind in terms of resource protection and what we could leverage in this comprehensive plan update?
Would someone like to, go ahead.
Official map.
I was going to ask if someone would like to explain transfer development rights, how that might work in South Whitehall.
Can we look towards our LVPC SMEs to discuss that?
I can take a stab at transfer development rights. So that's something that is, I would say, pretty infrequently used, but it certainly is a tool available under the Municipalities Planning Code. And it's something that under various multi-municipal plans is what is often looked into to try and facilitate exactly what you'd like to accomplish through the land use plan. But just looking at an individual municipality, the basic idea is that if there are areas that you would like to see preserved, then there can be a transfer of the development rights from that property to another place within the community where there's a better opportunity for actually creating additional, let's say, residential units or other types of development. And so it's a legal means where you can look at the development rights associated with given properties in two different locations, or more than two, but two different locations, and look to use those rights to get the development in places that make the most sense, like in places where you have community utilities, water, sewer, transportation capacity, things of that nature, and to not have it occur in places that lack those types of resources. And so it can just help with the implementation of a future land use plan that you would identify through the comprehensive planning process. Hopefully that was clear.
I would very much caution you on transfer of development rights as a township, because you basically have to agree that you're going to allow more density than you allow now in places like Cedar Crest Boulevard, at Route 22, around 15th Street and 22. You get the idea. 309 22. You get the idea. And I understand that there's some very difficult conversations around development in those areas occurring in the township right now. So you have to have those places. Those are the type of places with the type of infrastructure you need to make a transfer development rights program work. And you have to be willing to let buildings go tall and go dense. And if people don't want to tear down an old motel as it stands now, to allow basically medium density development, pursuing a earnest transfer development rights program is likely going to be unsuccessful. They're also very costly to administer. And so there's a lot of considerations. I'm not saying don't do it, but just from, you know, what I've read in the newspaper, you guys have some, you know, differing opinions within the township, and you'd have to sort those out and come to consensus in order to have a successful TDR program. And just one other last thing of call, because, you know, our job is to be super honest with you guys and tell you the good, bad, the ugly, and the neutral, and everything in between, right? So at the end of the day, if you want to do something like this, it's going to take you some time, and you're going to have to, again, be very deliberate, tie it back to your official map, amend your zoning, do a lot of after action items related to the comprehensive plan. So it would be a couple year process for you to set something like that up.
Yeah.
At a minimum.
Hey, Hannah?
Yeah, sorry.
This is Mike Walk. I'm going to try to give a high level comment, and then I'm going to have to leave and go to the next BOC meeting. So as I noted earlier, like I was sworn in January 2020, and honestly, we formed the Land Preservation Committee, and I worked practically 2 months full time on it, mostly to get educated. You know, so I talked to 2 counties, couple townships, 5 wildland conservancies, et cetera, et cetera. Donna Wright was a key person that I spoke with. Referred over to Ron Beitler, president of Lower Macungie Township, who's highly successful. So got a lot of education about the need for the official map, agricultural zoning, and so on and so forth. And talked about like these variety of methods on how one preserves farmland, and then talked about all these different funding sources and the state rules, the county rules, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I got educated. Our Board of Commissioners and our Planning Commission need that same education. It's great that you're here tonight explaining that to this grouping, but we need a wholesale education. And we've talked about this at BOC meetings about having a workshop where you know, the full BOC, the full Planning Commission, and there's more residents there who are, you know, highly interested in that. So that's basically what I think we need at a high level.
That's a really awesome idea. And this is a little different than doing something specifically within the township, but I just do want to let you know that thank God the pandemic is starting to hopefully, I don't know what you want to call it. We're sort of emerging out of that period of our lives, but we are going to do in-person Lehigh Valley Government Academy starting in September. The first course is on community planning. That is exactly what you guys need. It is the 101 of what you can do in Pennsylvania. The issue is because of still having to need to have some COVID restrictions, we're only limited to 18. We're limited to 18 students this year. It is 3 nights. It is a 3.5 hour per night commitment across 3 weeks. So it's pretty intense. But we recommend all planning commissioners, local planning commissioners, and supervisors take those courses, because it really gives you the tools and talks about different roles and responsibilities of agencies like ours at the county level to local governments. Our second one's going to be in October, and that's on zoning administration, which honestly, every other year we do zoning administration and then zoning, just general zoning. If you take zoning administration, it's like training for a zoning hearing board plus how to administer a zoning code. So it's like a twofer in the same amount of time, and that's limited to 18 as well. So I'm not sure exactly what your specific issues are, but we will have the registration for those courses open, if it isn't open now, very shortly. And I'd be happy to shoot you links to that if you've got folks that are interested.
Okay, I'll follow up with you then. Thank you.
A question. Northampton County has a program where townships can contribute agricultural preservation money, and it matched with additional state money with the county ag preservation easements to have a net result that there's much more funding. Is that available in Lehigh County?
Yes. And the township individually has to choose to enact that. And many townships have, by the way. I'm actually surprised South Whitehall has not. Because it's a faster way to get lands preserved.
So thank you, Mr. Wolk, for joining us. I know we are butting up to a BOC meeting tonight. So I think unless there's any other pieces here that folks want to add to, I'm going to advance us to our last question, which will really be important as we move into the third meeting and build out these recommendations that will be part of the comprehensive plan update for resource protection. So this is an opportunity we discussed what tools were resonating with us in the last question, and so much great insight from the working group members, from our SMEs, from staff of South Whitehall Township. So what do we really want to carry forward? And I know there's probably some things, again, we just discussed on the last slide that are going to pop up right away, but what's coming to mind? And it doesn't have to be the most specific thing. It can be a general area that we'll work through. And how are we going to update the resource protection section of the comprehensive plan to really reflect where South Whitehall wants to go in the next 10 years? So again, we're going to use our Jamboard just to get the ideas up there. Feel free to shout out ideas if you don't feel like writing a post-it, put it in the chat. But this is really going to be the opportunity for us to brainstorm and then dive into it in our third meeting.
There was one that I had wanted to add to the last one, but maybe we can just put it here, is as far as the funding tools for within the township is increasing your EIT, earned income tax, by usually it's about 0.25%. A lot of other municipalities use that to raise funds for whatever you want to use it for, and it's often related to natural resource protection or farmland protection. So it can be used either way. And I think the only requirement is that you have to have an open space plan in place, which you already have your 2009 plan, and it sounds like you're going to be updating. So,
hey Teresa, it's Randy. Curious, do you know if first-class townships are able to do the EIT increase for preservation efforts?
I don't know that specific. I don't know if I've had ever seen that as one of the rules, but we can check into it for you.
Yeah, I don't think the law differentiates.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Charlie's right. Again, Teresa, are you willing to look into that for Randy? Because that's a fundamental question there, Randy. I love it.
Well, Laura McCunge's doing it, and they're first class.
Yeah.
So there's an answer right there.
They raised the EIT?
Well, they're proposing to.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I don't know if it actually got approved yet.
I know there's several municipalities throughout the Lehigh Valley that have it, but I know education before it goes on the ballot is critical. It's, because some haven't passed, and that may make a difference.
It's typically a 8 to 12 month education process before it gets on that ballot.
And I think there's a couple choices. I think it's either property tax or earned income. I think it's a choice.
Right. Okay.
But it must be used for open space purposes. Can't be used for anything else.
Right.
I was just gonna go ahead.
Please go ahead, Charlie.
I was just gonna add to this list what we just talked about, that if the township has some local funding for ag pres, that they can match it with county money, and then the county can receive additional state money for ag preservation. So the net impact is much greater through those matches. The only downside is you have to go through the county's priority system for what is the most important agricultural preserved land.
And there is, Northampton County does not have a backlog. Lehigh County has an enormous backlog of farms. But if the township really wants to do this, really advocating with the county, who also is a portion of the dollars that go into the purchase of easements, you know, the more townships that are interested in this, the more then the county is going to be willing to start to support some of that too. And so, you know, it's really a partnership between the state, the county, and the local government to make this happen. And so there might be able to be more resources allocated vis-a-vis the desire of the communities to do so. And South Whitehall, again, is one of the larger townships in the county.
I would just add that on a priority basis, it's largely based upon the quality of the farmland, the cropland, and South Whitehall would actually rank pretty highly in that regard, for the most part.
You could also preserve properties on your own. There's a municipality in Northampton County that they put conservation easements on properties without going through the county program. And I think they have it so that it's just an easement. Some of it's ag, some of it's natural resources, and it's Bushkill Township. And they just get the easement on the property on their own. So that's also an option.
Yeah, I think they were mainly preserving woodland, which, you know, wasn't really, you know, highly ranked on the county's ag preservation system.
Yeah, they have a fair amount up along the, let's see, what Sober's Run that has some fairly large ag properties, but it's not a majority of it, but they do have a few of them.
These are great, and I capturing some of the discussion here, so that's what I've been typing away. While we've been chatting, we got some direction around the official map, or one of the items that we could look at: inventory sensitive areas, add them to the official map, and develop regulations to protect and preserve them. That's something to explore around the powers of the official map. Develop more flexible regulations to allow adaptive reuse and preservation of historic structures. Consider a transfer of development rights program that, if density receiving areas can be determined. Update the parks, recreation trails, and open space plan. So all things, and if anyone wants to speak more to what's up here that we haven't discussed yet. And the other thing I just wanted to quickly bring our attention back to is this prioritization of the takeaways from our last meeting. So recommendations around preserving, protecting what we have, budget and funding. I think, how do we bring in more preservation goals? Something that we haven't really talked about, and I know this was a topic of discussion in our last meeting, was how does resource protection enhance walkability and safety? And Becky was talking about some of the historic towns and crossroads that are inherently more walkable, but maybe there's some other thoughts around that from working group members or SMEs. So just wanted to revisit this in case it spurs any other ideas for recommendations we could carry forward.
I'd like to throw out there, Dave Manhart was the pioneer of the sidewalk inventory for the entire Lehigh Valley when he was working at the LVPC, and really looking at where your sidewalk networks connect is something I know Dave is talked to me about yesterday. And that's a really good way to then talk about, to think that systems thinking for your parks, rec, and open space connections is what as well.
Yes, thank you for that, Becky.
Hannah, this is Marie North, and hello to LVPC people who I have not seen in quite a while. this is the first meeting that I've attended, and so I'm a little out of step with what everyone is doing. But I did want to make a comment based on everything I've been seeing and hearing here, seeing on the sticky notes and hearing from people. I moved to South Whitehall in 1987, so I've been here 30 some years, and I've seen the change, I've seen the development, and I've heard the concerns. And not just concerns about development per se, although that's very strong, but I've heard concerns from people who have lived here longer than I have. And it goes back to, how do we preserve the story? How does South Whitehall want to preserve their history and their story? I just get a sense, and I've attended a number of meetings, and I was at the meeting for Ridge Farms. I attended a number of those. And I just get a sense from some of the residents that they feel perhaps that their voice is being lost. And so I'm thinking, as we talk about all the farms and we talk about the historic buildings, how does South Whitehall pull that together and create a story that takes in our past history as far as where we're at now and where we're going in the future? And maybe Becky or someone there at LVPC knows of another township that was somewhat successful in doing that, so that all residents in the township felt that they were being included, that their story mattered. And I'm just curious.
Well, I think this process is really critical to that, right? These are open meetings and anybody can join. And I know there's been a whole series of meetings that Hannah or Dave or Greg could talk to you more about over the last year or so, I believe. And a lot of it is, you know, people not wanting to come out and participate. But if you don't participate, you know, sitting around being an armchair quarterback doesn't get you anywhere either. So I think that these are really designed to start to get really, really in-depth feedback on certain subject areas that will help actually build that plan and that narrative that the township can use for its future. And there's still going to be a lot more public process as part of this as well. They'll start writing the plan and have lots of meetings and dialogue about that too. So it's not like the opportunities have ended in any way. And in fact, I will say officially on the record, this process is one of the most open, comprehensive planning processes that I have ever seen. The township is absolutely doing this the right way and a very professional way, according to standards that are recognized across the professional planning field, and bringing in all different types of experts on different types of subjects beyond LVPC. You know, have the support of Hannah, who is, you know, a seasoned planner in, you know, the city of Allentown before she came to Michael Baker and led the effort for a really groundbreaking comprehensive plan there. It brought in other consultants, you know, along the way as well to talk about specific things. So there's a lot of real good effort here that's extremely high quality, that I think is going to help support the creation of a really wonderful plan for the township.
Right, and I agree with you, Becky. I agree with you wholeheartedly because I've been to those meetings and I'm involved with the township on committees. So I agree with you, yeah, absolutely. But I think my point is I'm just trying to figure out, you know, how do we connect the dots? Like the person that talked about the barn that's going to be auctioned off. Is there a story behind that? What's the story of the barn? If the barn disappears, have we recorded the story? You know, do we have a way? In other words, we're talking about the Jordan Greenway, which I love the piece that goes through the Greenway that goes through South Whitehall. I've walked it a number of times. And that's, so we have that, and we have the historic buildings, and we have the farms. So and I don't know if this falls into a comprehensive plan or not, but how do we honor the story is what I'm saying. Is there some way to somehow record that? And and make it part of the plan in some way so people know, yeah, okay, that they know, people understand, okay, this is what's happened here and this is where we are going forward. But I guess it's more of a respect for the past is what I'm saying. That's all.
Sorry, I didn't understand that, Marie, your question. Yeah, definitely. Is there I mean, I apologize, I don't know this. Is there a historical society that covers the South Whitehall area?
And that I don't know.
Not to my knowledge, we actually went looking for a historical society with the 2009 comp plan and did not find one. So it would be wonderful if one was formed. and
Yeah,
and actually,
maybe
it was
Lehigh County. I mean, Lehigh County has one, and maybe that's the place to talk about documenting these barns as well.
I know it was suggested with the preservation of the King George Inn that they're looking for an adaptive reuse for that. And one of the first things that was suggested was a South Whitehall Township Historical Society.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going. And I don't want to take over because I know you're running out of time. That's kind of where I'm going. And at some point, you know, Greg, I talk with you, I talk with Randy. At some point, you know, I can flesh this out a bit better. I don't want to take over this time here. But because I've had some past experiences as well with some of the people who've lived here a long time. So maybe we can just have a conversation at some point at one of our meetings. But that's all.
Well, definitely so appreciate you sharing your voice, Marie. And we did, you know, as you were speaking and as Becky was giving her thoughts, I tried to capture some of that here up on the Jamboard. So please feel free to review what's there. We'll obviously be sending and sharing this out with everyone to make sure that we've captured it and we're moving forward in a way that reflects our conversation. And we are, you know, honing in on the end of our meeting. And I just want to open it up again, particularly to our working group members who have, you know, you volunteered your time to be part of this discussion and this collaboration. Are there, in terms that you don't see up here and you want to make sure they don't get, you know, we carry them forward as we move into our next meeting, and anything that's popping to mind, and please feel free to speak up and I'll capture it. And I only do this because we met in person, but Michelle or Marcia, since we had some great discussion last week around preservation, and also Michelle with walkability, do you feel like there's anything in here you'd like to see? And if not, that's totally fine. Just give a thumbs up.
No, everything looks good.
Great, thank you. And Charlie, I know you bring immense expertise in this area. Anything you as a working group member want to make sure we don't lose as we move forward? And Marcia, anything on your end, if I may?
That's good. I think it reflects what we talked about last week, and look forward to next week.
Wonderful.
I was muted. I don't have anything to add. It's Charlie Schmale.
Okay, sorry, I took your silence as agreement, Charlie. Well, and I guess as we begin to close out tonight, and you know, please do not feel that if something comes to you, as we shared in our last meeting, and as you may be familiar with, as we've built out a form so you can drop in additional thoughts around these discussion questions. It will be shared when we share the recording of this meeting and the Jamboard. So we actually have next week off, and we will restart our meetings the week of August 2nd. For resource protection, I will quickly bring that up, but as I bring up the date and time of our third meeting, LVPC subject matter experts, do you have any parting words of wisdom for us as we move forward?
I would just mention one thing with regard to the ag easement program that we talked quite a lot about, and also the municipal participation. You know, that program is based on, it requires an appraisal, of the property, and the county, in terms of their ability to provide funding, does have a cap. And so in some situations, especially for higher value farms, that the ability to preserve that farm could hinge in part on the ability of the municipality to be able to provide a portion of the funding for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for that detail. Any other closing thoughts from our subject matter experts?
I'd just like to thank all of you for participating so actively in your community and taking the time out of your lives to make sure that, you know, the present and the future are going to be bright. That means everything. And that really supports not only the township, but what the county does and what we do as a region. And, you know, you are an owner, and not enough people sometimes take that into the consideration of you know what that means for them, and you're doing that this evening, and I'd like to thank you for that.
Thank you so much for those inspirational closing words, Becky. And Teresa, anything you would like to add with subject matter expertise?
No, I don't think so.
All right, well, I want to again thank our Lehigh Valley Planning Commission subject matter experts. It has been incredible to have your knowledge shared with this group. We recorded this session, so we'll be able to revisit it if we have questions. And we know you shared a ton of wonderful resources, which will go out to the working group. Greg, do you have anything you'd like to add on behalf of the township before we close out?
Other than thank the participants of this meeting, and hopefully the meeting in 2 weeks. I understand that this can be difficult sometimes, and I'm just glad to see that some of the residents have come out and are out here dedicated to helping their township, and that's a great thing to see.
Thank you, Greg. And yes, oh, sorry, someone want to speak up? That may have been my echo. Sorry. Definitely want to thank everyone for your time and your participation. And as a reminder, if you're able to give us more of your wonderful collaboration and insights, the next meeting of this working group, where we build out recommendations and start to think about who leads, where does funding come from, what's the timeline, how are we going to measure success, that is going to be on Monday, August 2nd at 5:30 p.m. This will be an in-person meeting at the municipal building. We will stream the meeting as well, and make sure it is recorded. We will work very hard to make sure audio is clear. And we are just really excited that you have joined this process, and we really encourage you to continue on, and you'll be hearing from us about the next steps. Does anyone have any closing questions or thoughts before we head out? Guess it's all been said. So thank you guys so much. Again, thank you for your participation and your great ideas. Thank you to LVPC and obviously to South Whitehall for really being the champion of this process. So enjoy your evenings. I think it's slightly cooler out and less smoky, thankfully. So take care.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good evening.
All right. I'm just going to save everything, stop the recording.
There we go.
Trying to do too many things at once.